exercise. So when you read newspaper, when you read see news on TV or hear something, there are things that kind of brings tragedy, suffering, sorrow, right? To you individually or to people you care or to communities, right? Sadly enough, because we are living in a fallen world, there are so many things that causes trouble, again, massive disaster or personal tragedy. And I'm pretty sure you could think of something, right? So just one at a time. Just shout out what you think causes trouble, sorrow, difficulty, misery, all kinds of ugly things. All right? You got that, right? So who want to go first? Okay, there we go. Blue shirt. Who's your parents? See me afterward, okay? Okay, but okay. All right. All right. My brother. All right, who's next? Go ahead. Earthquakes. Okay. Earthquakes. Let's keep going. Syrian refugee babies. Okay. That's very specific, but sin. Oh, that's very broad. So we'll put it up here. Okay. Let's be specific, okay? That's good, but let's be as specific as we can. Let's keep going. We need to fill this up. So, money, okay. Oh boy. Okay. Keep going. Pride, okay. Greed, somebody said. What? Envy, okay. Envy. Yeah. True. Let's go. Let's keep going. Gluttony, okay. And somebody said sickness, okay. Hold on. Let's get it one more time. Sickness. Intolerance, okay. What? Craziness, okay. You want to say mental illness or laziness? I'm sorry. Or sloth, okay. Kind of old-fashioned way, right? Kind of more of a vocabulary 3000. Who else? Lust, okay. Lust. Let's keep going. I want to hear from the younger ones, young'uns. Arrogance, okay. Okay, pride and anger, okay. Let's keep going. What else? Racism, okay. And all kinds of isms, right? Narcissism, okay. Sexism. Narcissism, yeah. Nothing wrong with it. Let's keep going. A few more. What? Pessimist, okay. Pessimism, let's say pessimism. What? Wrath. WRATH, right? Wrath. Okay. Anger and wrath, okay. Are similar. Mental illness, okay. Mental illness, okay. Physical disabilities, right? Just one or two more. Birds? Okay. You watch the Birds by Hitchcock? Whatever. Okay. If you own a nice black sedan and birds poop on that every morning, then you can have it. Separation from God. Okay. Well, it's okay. We're kind of getting in there. One last. Personal desire, okay? Well, okay. Envy? Okay, somebody said envy. Oh, it's on there, yeah. Oh, one more, one last. Drama. Not TV drama, drama in life. Drama in life, okay. So you are saying, you are implying that your mom's a drama queen? Your mom's dramatic? Okay. Anxiety. Okay, one more. Okay, let's okay, that's last. We can probably keep going on this and spend entire morning, but that's not the main point. Okay. Just we'll keep there. And we'll go to this morning's passage, which is Luke chapter 4. All right, Luke chapter 4, verse 16 through 21. Luke chapter 4, 16, verse 21. So if you know the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 1 and 2, we hear about the annunciation of the birth of Jesus in chapter 1. In chapter 2, we have the kind of Christmas story, all that. And chapter 3, kind of we meet John the Baptist, who prepares the way. And finally in chapter 4, we kind of see Jesus as a grown-up. And he goes into wilderness. He fasts 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end of the fasting, Satan appears and he tried to tempt him. And of course, he kind of defeated Satan by the word of God. And he returned to the town. So this is our first encounter of Jesus as he starts his public ministry. And he entered synagogue, and this is what is about. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. By the way, prophet Isaiah was one of the favorite books from the Bible for Jesus. He quotes from Isaiah multiple times. Deuteronomy and Isaiah were those two favorite books by Jesus. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." So, according to Luke, this is the mission statement of Jesus, right? And he has the formula. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." And in Old Testament, if you remember, the Spirit of God came upon somebody when that person is about to start a mission that was given by God. Remember Samson, when he became the judge, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he got this superhuman power. David was anointed by Samuel as he was chosen to be the king. Same with Saul. So the idea for the Jews that the Spirit of the Lord is upon somebody meant that this person is chosen by God and he's being equipped to do the mission that God is planning for him. So it says, I'm about to start my mission. And all right, my captivated audience right here. What is Jesus' mission on earth? Why did he come? Bingo. Yeah, to save us. Yeah, exactly. Michael's doing a good job, right? So you know he's doing a good job. Yeah. That's like the easiest and simplest way of saying it is to save us. He came to save us. He came to fulfill the salvation of God. He came to fulfill the full scope of God's redemption for His creation, right? That's what you know. The problem is, in this passage, he doesn't talk about salvation, right? He doesn't talk about S word. What did he say? To proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are opposed. So if you really don't understand what he's trying to do, this sounds like a typical message of kind of a left-wing, liberal, social gospel preacher, right? You've heard these kind of sermons sometimes, right? You hear these left-wing Christians who say, yeah, it's about helping the poor. It's about mending the social ills. It sounds like Jesus is really preaching to that kind of crowd. But that's not what he's doing, right? We know who Jesus is, right? And we believe what kind of message Jesus brought. So we really need to dig into what he's trying to say. And the clue is actually at the end of this quote from Prophet Isaiah. He ended his reading of Prophet Isaiah from Isaiah chapter 58. 61, by the way. I was confused by the morning devotion tomorrow. So it's 61. And it says, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So to make it quick, he's saying, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me so that I could proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. What is the year of the Lord's favor? Jubilee, right? So he's saying, I came here to proclaim the Jubilee. So I want us to spend time to really dig into what Jesus is saying here, and in fact, what salvation is all about. And the reason why we care for the neighbors is not because we want to do good things, just good things, but because we do believe that it's part of working out our salvation. So let's try to see how that works. So we'll go through some of these PowerPoint slides. Yeah, salvation, redemption is the only hope for human being. And that's why we have this bold statement, gospel is the good news. Not just for us, but for all humanity. For all God's creation, right? So where do we have this boldness to say that? Okay, what is going on here? I pushed the wrong one. Okay, salvation. So what is salvation? How do you define salvation? Love these guys. Michael, you're doing a good job. What is salvation? No, you don't have to. I mean, if you want to, you could. How would you define salvation? I don't believe this. You're cheating on smartphone. Shame on you. Oh, boy. All right, that's fine. Repeat that again. Uh-huh. Okay. Right. Good. That's the kind of idea that we have, right? Salvation. What is salvation? If you believe in God, your sins will be forgiven, right? And you will go to heaven when you die. This is very like a simplistic way of explaining salvation, but that we all agree upon, right? You can say a few different things, add a few things, but this is the kind of a bottom line. Believe in God, your sins will be forgiven, and you'll go to heaven when you die. And in fact, in the Colossians, it says similar things. He had delivered from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. But there's a slight problem. The problem is this statement here, this passage here, gives kind of essence of what salvation is about, but it doesn't necessarily give the full scope of God's salvation. It doesn't give us the full picture of what it means for God to save the world. So we need to kind of go a little bit deeper. So let me take you to the Garden of Eden. We'll kind of jump all over the Bible, so you have to bear with me and hopefully get some coffee or some sugar so you'll be fully awake and alert. So this is from Genesis chapter 2, and as I read this passage for you, try to kind of have a mental picture of this garden. All right? And try to see what word comes to your mind to describe this place. Okay? And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. And so on. There are 4 other rivers, Gihon, Tigris, Euphrates. And let me remind you, this location is somewhere around like modern-day Iraq. Nobody knows exactly where, but it's kind of a Middle East kind of area, okay? The garden was somewhere around there, even though nobody knows for sure, but that's the idea. And especially the audience lived in Palestinian area. So, trees pleasant to the sight, good for food. There's a river flowing out of the garden. And it feeds 4 major rivers of that ancient Near Asian kind of region. And where river Havilah goes, there's gold and onyx, bdellium, all kinds of precious stone. All right. So, you got your mental picture? The garden was, how would you describe it? Beautiful. Yeah. Perfect. Let's keep going. Peaceful. Yeah. Oh boy. The governor should have heard you, right? Colorado. Like Colorado. Okay. Full of resources. Okay. Luscious. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing processed, right? All organic, heirloom. Let's keep going. Oh, yeah. That's enough. What else? Yeah, plentiful. What? Yeah, lively. In harmony with God. Okay, you're going further, but that's the direction. Thank you. Right? You can kind of agree to what everybody said, right? That is the garden. So you can say abundant, full of life, beautiful, peaceful, harmony. And that's what God intended for us, or to be more precise, for our ancestor Adam and Eve. That's the garden. And the idea of that garden is kind of summed up in one word by a lot of theologians. The word is shalom. They say it was shalom. There was shalom in the garden, right? Shalom is Jewish word, and usually, what's the English term for shalom? Peace, right? The problem is peace doesn't really encapture what we just talked about. Because if you go to a dictionary, these are the entries that you find. A state in which there is no war or fighting. An agreement to end the war. A period of time when there is no war or fighting. So this is very passive. peace in this world is a state where there's no conflict or a lack of conflict. Exactly. If war ended, there's a peace. If husband and wife were having kind of issues and raising their voices, they stopped kind of raising their voices against each other and stopped throwing things at each other or kind of using verbal abuse. Then they kind of begin to act like civilized people. Then they said there's peace. But that's not what shalom is about. We just saw that, right? Bible has much more to it. So the easiest way to define shalom could be the way things should be. The way things should be, as God intended when He created the heaven and earth. So going back to the Garden of Eden, right? Garden of Eden is what shalom is about. That's what God intended. So, the shalom we just talked about, when he talked about garden being beautiful, perfect, harmony, and all that, actually, the theologians kind of divide those shalom into 4 areas. There was spiritual shalom. You said harmony with God, right? There was harmony with God. There was no kind of enmity between humankind and God, right? It was like if you read Genesis chapter 2, it feels like a kind of family, right? God walks in the garden, and Adam and Eve comes up, and they had a conversation. There was a harmony. There was no fear between mankind and God. There was psychological shalom. Adam and Eve were not ashamed of themselves. They were just who they were, and they were fine with it. There was social shalom. There was Adam and Eve, and there was no enmity between Adam and Eve. And there was ecological shalom. Animals didn't fear man. Men didn't fear animals. But sadly, unfortunately, this shalom didn't last that long, right? We know what happened. We know what happened, right? The serpent destroyed everything in chapter 3 of book of Genesis. So the serpent was crafty, and he is a liar, right? So, Satan is a liar. That's his specialty. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? That's a lie. He never said that, right? God said, "Don't eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil." That's the only thing He said. But He twisted it. Did God really say, "You shall not eat of any tree"? Anyway, I will not expound on this because that's going to be another session. You know what happened, right? So they ate of the fruit, and that was kind of a beginning of the downward spiral. And that's the world we are living in as a result. We can kind of break down what happened in the garden in kind of a breaking of shalom. The first thing was by taking and eating of the fruit, spiritual shalom was broken. As I mentioned earlier briefly, there was, before the fall, there was a perfect harmony with God, right? He brought animals to the man to see what he would call them. And there was, as I said, daily kind of conversation. And some of you have children, and when they were a lot younger, like say 4 or 5, you can kind of picture the typical day, especially when you were working. When you come home, sometimes even before you actually enter the house, as they hear your footstep, these little people are excited. "Hey, he's Dad!" And they just, as soon as you open the door, they just throw themselves at you, right? And you are just smiling and you, like, "How was your day?" And they kind of try to tell you how great his day was. That was the relation between God and Adam and Eve at the time. There was no enmity, no fear. But sin entered, what happened? They hid themselves from the presence of the Lord. Fear entered. The harmony with God, the shalom with God was broken. So sin entered and fear entered. And they were afraid. I was afraid. And here, narcissism, separation from God, right? That causes tremendous suffering for a lot of people. And some of you, if you were not born in a Christian home, you would understand what this means, right? Before you had peace with God, your life was not fun. You may have thought you were having a time of life, but once you met Jesus, when you looked back, you realized, oh, that was rubbish, right? Augustine put it really well. I was restless until I found rest in God. Still today, there are tens of millions of people or billions of people in this world who are wrestling, struggling, having a sleepless night because they don't have peace with God. So, as a result, we said these things. Fear, restlessness, insecurity, guilt. I've been to India twice because my sister's family is a missionary out to India. And when you go to India, the funny thing is most of the tourists are from what is called first world. You mean a lot of Americans and Europeans and even Japanese. Kind of relatively speaking, rich people, successful people. But when they kind of felt they reached at that kind of a peak of their career and the goal, at least when they're smart and honest, they realize, oh, dang, my $1 million mansion, my kind of $1 million+ salary don't really give me satisfaction. There's still kind of a emptiness in my heart. And they go to India because they feel like they can find some kind of a spiritual high. These people even walk on this burning coal with bare foot. These people are in procession, kind of almost self-mutilating, so that their physical pain could bring ecstasy, which they believe that it takes them closer to the deity. What a shame. Jesus never demanded us to mutilate ourselves. Remember, that's what the priest of Baal did in the ultimate showdown at Mount Carmel, right? So, the first impact of sin or fall is that it broke the spiritual shalom. And still, people are out there who are suffering from it. And then, this is not sequential. I'm pretty sure you know that, but it's more like logical. So, don't try to make it more like a, kind of sequential. It's just for the sake of helping us understand. Psychological shalom was broken. What do I mean by that? In Genesis chapter 2, there's an interesting detail. It talks about this. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. It's an interesting detail. Who cares? They were naked. Were they naturalists? Were they kind of the first first ones of the although naked beach or whatever? No, it's not. But the reason why the Holy Spirit made sure this was recorded in the Bible is because it has something. They were naked. They were not ashamed. In most of the artworks that depicts Adam and Eve from medieval period to modern time, usually Adam and Eve were kind of painted as a beautiful men and women. Is it because that? Is it because they were beautiful, handsome? No, it's not. So then why? If you remember Genesis chapter 2, when God made man, how did he make Adam? What? Yeah, from the clay, right? So how did he make it? Right. So he made it out of image, worked with clay or dirt, right? Adam is kind of dirt, clay. Whose image is that? Who works with clay? Potter, artist, sculptor, right? God used his hand. This is, of course, an analogy, right? But the image is God using dirt to form Adam in his own image. Like potter, like a sculptor. So when God finished Adam, and here God is an artist, right? What is Adam to God? Thank you. I like this group a lot. Masterpiece, right? That's how artist sees his work. It's a masterpiece. Even these little ones, when they draw something with crayon or whatever, even though you don't know what he's trying to or she's trying to depict, to him it's like, I made it. There's a mark, my mark here. It's my masterpiece. So, to God's eyes, Adam and Eve are masterpieces, like as you see your children, right? No matter what other people may say about your children, your daughter, your son is the most amazing thing. That's how God. Oh wow. We'll talk about it later. So, the fact that even though they were naked, they were not ashamed, means that Adam and Eve were looking at themselves not through the eyes of man, but through the eyes of their daddy. They knew that their daddy, their God, made them, according to Psalm 139, wonderfully and fearfully. So they were not ashamed. What happened? They ate of the fruit. Virtually, there was no change. It was too quick a time. It was not a kind of a concentrated fat. And then after eating them, they didn't gain 30 pounds on the spot. It's just fruit. Nothing happened. But as soon as they ate the fruit, their eyes were open. They knew they were naked. And shame came. I mean, they were the same. 30 seconds ago and 30 seconds after, they were the same. No change. But shame entered. How? Because now sin entered. Instead of seeing themselves through the eyes of God, they began to see themselves through the eyes of man. What's the difference? God's perspective, divine perspective, as we mentioned, your masterpiece. World's perspective, you are not good enough. Sounds familiar? Been there before? The world never tells you you are a masterpiece. The world always wants you to feel that you are not good enough. You know what kind of a vocation has one of the most kind of percentage of kind of insecurity, depression, so kind of substance abuse issue? What? Showbiz and modeling, right? The supermodels, people in showbiz, who actually covers all the magazine cover, right? Who gets envy of every young man and woman, even the older ones. Wish I could be that handsome, that beautiful, They're the ones who are suffering from insecurity. Why? So the world keeps telling them, you are not beautiful enough. The blonde model will think, oh, I wish I had that black hair. The Italian model with black hair would want to have fairer skin and blonde hair and blue eyes. The list goes on and on and on. Why? The world never tells you you're good enough. They always set a goal to kind of achieve as your next goal. All right, from a 2-bedroom apartment, I want to buy a house. So you scout out, you kind of get a raise, and you look for 3-bedroom garage. And once you feel like you made it, you begin to notice bigger houses, better houses, more exclusive houses. The list keeps going on and on. There's a magazine that is sent to the millionaires. I had a chance to kind of look through that years ago, and there was an ad for your lovely wife's birthday. Here's a suggestion. And there was a wristwatch, handmade from Switzerland, with a price tag of $500,000, studded with diamond and sapphire. And that kind of world goes higher and higher, deeper and deeper, and still they tell you you're not good enough. As a result, inferiority complex, depression, addiction, self-love, arrogance, and these things, drama, pride, envy, anxiety, gluttony, sloth, lust, arrogance, anger, narcissism, pessimism, personal desire. These stem from the fact that we are not having a shalom with myself. So, addiction, and there's a term, this is kind of mental disease. I don't know whether it's a real picture or kind of a, made up picture, but there's a term in mental illness. It's kind of it's extreme form of self-mutilation. They think this is a extra limb, so they feel this needs to go, and these people keep doing it. Yeah, when you don't have peace with yourself, that's what happens. And we see a lot of those people around us. And maybe some of us are still wrestling with one of these issues because you may not have shalom with yourself. But salvation is not just having shalom with God. Once you kind of mend your relationship with God, then God will allow you to have peace with yourself. There are so many of us who just can't forgive himself or herself, even when God already forgave you. Social shalom was broken. So when God made Eve and brought to Adam, this is what Adam told Eve. This is at last my bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Sounds like a anatomy class, right? Doesn't sound very romantic. But this in Hebrew, this is very poetic. So whatever kind of a word, whatever expression you used for your wife way back when you're dating, I don't know, honey or plum of my eyes or whatever that was, this is those kind of a sweet talking. You can imagine the distance between Adam and Eve when Adam was saying these words to Eve, right? Probably very close. If not, he was not there to put his hands on Eve because of God. At least he was very close, right? And this means that you are part of me because you knew Eve was made out of his kind of bone. So he knew that she's not himself, but he's saying that you are kind of it's a superlative, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. You're better than me. Part of me, but better than me. You're different, but we are kind of equal, or you're better than me. There was a peace between Adam and Eve. But after he ate of the fruit, something drastic happened. God asked, "Who told you to eat the fruit?" to Adam. And Adam answered, "The woman whom you gave to be with me. She gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate." Right? You can picture Adam kind of distancing himself from her, right? The woman. And I'm pretty sure, even though I don't have authority to say those, he used something much meaner than the woman. Use your imagination, right? Yeah. If you laugh, you know what I mean, right? The woman. And he's even kind of implying, he's blaming God, right? You put in the garden. She made me eat that. What he's doing? He's doing a very typical objectification. What is objectification? Using other human being as a means of meeting one's need, such as power, wealth, pleasure, success, etc. When you are turning a human being as means or tools to achieve your goal, you are objectifying a person. That's what Adam did. If Adam were a godly man, what he should have done is, oh God, as a husband, I should have told her better. I should have reminded her. But I didn't. So Eve was kind of deceived by serpent, and I let it happen. It's my fault. That should have been his kind of response. But instead, he's kind of trying to save himself, kind of blame shifting Eve. That's objectification. Social shalom was broken, right? The other became only a means to achieve my well-being. As a result, what happened? Murder, indifference, domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, virtual slavery, racism, genocide, disparity of wealth, prostitution, redlining. I'm pretty sure you're joking, but sometimes my brother, refugee babies, greed, intolerance, racism, sexism, all of these happen because social shalom was broken. How is it possible that we do this? Because when we fail to recognize the image of God that's implanted in every human being. Right? When you see anybody who walks on the earth, regardless of his religion, economic status, political view, we should be able to see the image of God. But when we fail to do that, suddenly it's okay to mistreat that person because I don't have any relationship with it. Remember, last night I told you about the importance of naming. He doesn't have a name. He's one of those 1,000 employees. So our company is in financial crisis. How do we solve this problem? Oh, let's downsize, right? So let's let go of 500 employees. Then we could save X amount of money. That's a great idea. So you just let go of the 500 people. And when we had a financial crisis in the late 90s, you heard all these horror stories, right? Families, a woman who's supporting kind of a parent who's kind of battling cancer, lost her job, lost her insurance, lost her house, became homeless one night. We heard a lot of these tragedies. And how? I'm not going to go into all these, rules of business, but the bottom line is that when you see those employees as number, not as human beings with families and all of their personal stories, that happens. There is a TV series that I never watched, but I know the story. The Secret Boss, is it right? Undercover Boss, thank you. I'm sorry. Similar. Do you know the premise of the show? Undercover Boss, right? a kind of CEO of a company, kind of dresses like a just an employee. It goes around, works with the people on the assembly line, like goes to kind of where janitors working, and asks these questions. What do you think about this company? What do you think about that? And he just kind of gets to know them, and of course they say great things, and find out these are like hardworking people. And toward the end of the show, the undercover boss is back to his Oval Office, the corner office, dressed up, and the guy at the bottom line of the kind of food chain of the company comes up. He or she is kind of a reluctant, kind of feel awkward because he doesn't or she doesn't understand why the CEO is wanting to see him, and shows up. He's like, and he calls the name, say Sarah, and she's like, you know my name? And then realize it just dawned on her that that guy who had all these questions is now CEO, and she's like surprised. And he says, I know you are, working hard. I know you never had a vacation. So I'll send you and your family took vacation to Bahamas. Like, she's like, wow. And then I know your mom's suffering. We'll take care of all the hospital bills. And she's like, not knowing what to do. And he adds up all kinds of great things. And everybody's in tears, and, the show ends. Why? Why is it moving? Because the boss kind of at least saw this one employee not as a one among 100, but because he saw this person with a story, an episode. And now he, by becoming undercover boss, interacted with this person, got to know this person, right? And that moves us. So, when that social shalom is broken again, in the sinful world, we can do all kinds of things. Sex trafficking, no one in this room would even imagine your child being in that place. Or even those American or German tourists who go to Cambodia or Thailand or India for that particular reason wouldn't dare to imagine their own children being in that situation. Or like child labor in Pakistan or India. They wouldn't imagine their children being in that place, right? Pakistan kind of working in this kind of place. You believe that our children deserve education and every good thing you can afford. But when it comes to somebody else far away, to whom I don't have any connection, some people don't care. And it's totally okay to let them work in that kind of situation. And that's none of my business. You heard about the horrible fire in Bangladesh many years ago in a sweatshop, right? Hundreds of people died. Why? Because we won some quality stuff at a ridiculous cheap price. And sometimes, not intentionally, but we end up turning our blind eyes to those. And as a result, to cut cost, those workers end up dying in inferno. And it's hard to believe that actually this happened in this country. This is not in the 1800s. This is 1900s. And this hanging continued until 1980. Believe or not. And how is this possible? When you don't see the image of God. When social shalom is broken, you can do all kinds of horrible things. You know this probably, but a lot of those Nazi German officers who oversaw all this concentration camp were Christians. Did you know that? they were church-going people. Sunday after Sunday, they went to church. And they still did such heinous thing without even thinking about it. How is it possible? Are they like devil? No, they're like us. I want you to think about that. They're not that evil compared to us. They were, in one sense, decent people. They played music, Beethoven and Bach. They went to church on Sunday. They cared for their children. But they didn't have any qualms about doing those horrible things to those Jewish people. Why? They didn't think about social shalom. They didn't bother to see those Jewish people as having the image of God. And when that happens, genocide can be done. Fourth, ecological shalom was broken. As I mentioned earlier, the job of Adam was giving, the first job was giving names to animals, but also God put him in the garden. And he was supposed to work and keep it. So Adam's job was actually gardener. And in our time, gardener is not that, I love gardening, but gardener is not that kind of a posh job title, right? But in ancient times, gardener was the image of the kings. In the ancient times, economy of a country depended so much on good harvest. And they believed that if they had a good king who's favored by God, you will have a plentiful harvest. So many ancient kings kind of identified themselves as gardener. And that's why they had one of the 7 world mystery, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, right? So there's a proof. So Adam being gardener is kind of Adam was pictured as the suzerain king, a vessel king for God. As a creator God, and as his son, as his image bearer, Adam's job was taking care of God's creation. But what happened after the fall? This happened. Cursed is the ground. Thorns and thistles came, and everything was broken. So, as a result, there was a kind of fear between man and animal, and we forgot that our job is to take care of God's creation. So, we are living in a world where there's extinction, pollution, destruction, water shortage. Maybe not so much in Colorado yet, but I saw like a housing project kind of expanding. And what cracked me up like years ago was there was a newspaper article about kind of bear attack in New Jersey. Right? They were saying these bears are invading human habitat. How funny, right? It's the other way around, right? People needed bigger houses with golf course. So actually people invaded a habitat of bears that's been their kind of a ground for many centuries. And bears were kicked out of where they're used to roam. And of course, they're going to invade. So, as a result of the breaking of ecological shalom came earthquake. What is it? Money, meaning the resources were not justly divided. Sickness, natural illness, physical disabilities. Birds, I don't know about that, but lots of birds. Like too many birds because there is not enough of kind of a natural enemy. So like exactly. Yeah, and it's because of the kind of a healthy food chain was broken, right? Did anybody read about this article in the Yellowstone National Park? They actually released wolf they brought wolf back to Yellowstone? Because the overpopulated deer was really damaging the foliage and ecosystem. So when they brought back the wolf, what happened after like 10 plus years, they saw actually the waterways and the shrubs and tree lines are kind of being restored. Because of the wolf, the army of deer couldn't really graze like viciously, and wolf kind of became natural controller of the population of the deer. So again, when men thinking, wolf are bad, they are eating these poor, helpless deer, let's kill them. When we all slaughtered wolf, destroyed God's equilibrium, it happened. So as a result, this is a picture from the Amazon jungle. Every year, size of New Jersey is disappearing because we want more steak, more burger. So to raise cheap soybeans and corn, it's being destroyed. The chicken you eat from fast food doesn't come from farm. They come from this kind of factory. And they are stressed out, and they are given antibiotics and growth hormone. And in fact, the chicken nugget you eat is actually filled with antibiotics and growth hormones. And we'll find out in 20, 30 years the impact of this kind of farming. The good news is this is not the end, right? This is not the end. That's why we need Jesus. Okay. Do you want to break or do you want to just keep going? Keep going? Okay, let's keep going. If you need to, you could just, yeah. So back to a passage from Luke, or originally from Isaiah chapter 61. So again, told you that Jesus' mission was proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, which is Jubilee, right? So what is Jubilee? Well, that's actually, let me see. I don't know what's the best way. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go. Okay. So in Leviticus chapter 25, you can read it in your time, in your spare time, and they were supposed to observe Sabbath year every seventh year. And after seventh Sabbath year, which is 49, the year after that will be 50th year. The Jews were supposed to consecrate the year and proclaim liberty through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. So that's where the year of Jubilee comes from. In the year of Jubilee, they were supposed to return the land, and also they were supposed to release slaves. So, what is Jubilee about? Kind of crash course in the history of Israel. Israel was in Egypt through Joseph, and they became numerous and very powerful. And Pharaoh, who did not know God or Joseph, came in power, and he subdued them and enslaved them. And after 400 plus years, the Israelites cried out to God, and God heard their cry, sent Moses, and he did this miracle, redemption of Exodus. So they were able to, as a people's group, 600,000 people were able to leave Egypt, depending on who's telling the story, cross the Red Sea, and wandered on Sinai Peninsula. Eventually, they entered the land of Canaan. And when they actually left Egypt and went into Canaan, three important changes has happened. One, in Egypt they were slaves. Through Exodus they became free. You may not appreciate what that means, but you can imagine, right? From slave to free, that's a salvation right there. Second, in Egypt, they were just Hebrews, just people's group, the slaves. But as they went to Canaan, they became a nation. Three, when they were in Egypt, they were slaves, so they didn't have any belongings. Maybe they had pots and pans, clothing, but they didn't have any possession. But as they entered Canaan, as they got the land, they became landowners. And this is agricultural economy. So owning a land means that you suddenly become a kind of middle class. Does it make sense? So they had land, and this is what happened. When they had land, and in Numbers, in book of Numbers, you go through all these like seemingly boring list of names and how God divided between the tribes and by the clans and eventually by the families, right? So each family was given a plot of land. And when they got land, this is kind of their way of life. They built a house somewhere, and they divide the land. So this is for cattle. This is for wheat. This is for grape. This is for olive tree, right? And other things, but these are major kind of economy. So with wheat, they make flour, bread, right? Olive oil, and preserved olive. Grape, produce wine. From cattle, you get wool, you get milk, you get butter and cheese. Once in a while, you slaughter an animal. So just imagine regular dinner table. You have a loaf of bread, olive oil, and green, or probably green olive is right? Green olive, a glass of wine, a cheese, and once in a while, lamb chop. Even by today's standard, that's a pretty decent meal, right? If you're having those kind of meal at a restaurant in Denver, at least $50 per person or more. That is a very concrete way of describing life of shalom. They were slaves in Egypt, scraping day by day. But now they entered land of Canaan, flowing with milk and honey. And God gave these lands to each family that they didn't till, they didn't work to get. And this is a life that God wanted for His people, so that they could have dignity. You have to work, of course, but at the end of the day, if you worked hard as a father, as a man of the family, you know you can provide your kids with good meat. Now, when you see your kids just, shoving those food into your mouth, enjoying this good food, you feel you are dignified. You know you are being a good father. You're providing. And of course, you know that God is good because God allowed me to provide my family through my hard work. And God blessed my work. But the truth is, not every one of is good at business, right? Right? Let's say, just hypothetically, let's say, sometime this afternoon, I heard the only doctor I know is Chuck. I'm pretty sure there are other doctors, but he told me, so I know you're a doctor. So Chuck was walking by in this compound, And he saw an elderly man on the side of the road. And he went, as a doctor's kind of instinct, and found out he's in emergency, right? So he did whatever he could to bring this person back to health, and by God's grace and by his medical skill, he was able to revive this person. And he was very grateful, right? And said, oh yeah, I was there, I'm a doctor. It's no big deal, right? But turned out that guy was a billionaire. And later when he went to hospital to check up, the doctor told him, if without that kind man, you would have died at that point. He was really moved. He kind of tracked him down and came to your church and said, I'm very grateful, so I'm going to just give every family $1 million as a way of thanking. Hypothetically. And you make sure you give a tenth to him, right? So, you're given $1 million cash that you didn't need. So, I'm pretty sure as responsible kind of grown-ups, you'd plan to invest it wisely, right? But with good intention, but not everybody has that skill. So some people may end up actually doubling that gift in 10 years. Somebody may actually end up losing all of them because you made bad choices. That happens. Say, I was kind of a greedy person and I heard rice is very exotic. People really love rice and it's expensive. So instead of wheat, I planted rice. And as you know, rice requires a lot of water. And Palestine doesn't have a lot of water. So I ruined my entire year. I was still stubborn. Usually greedy people are very stubborn and not smart. This is a very general statement. So I kept on planting rice. Failed, right? So I ended up kind of asking my neighbor to help me out, right? So got a loan because I had to feed my family. That can happen. So I kept on making bad kind of decisions, and I ended up accumulating a huge debt. And at that time, they didn't have any currency. The only way is barter. So I say, hey, Steve, sorry, I can't really do this anymore. So why don't you take my land? And let's call it even. Yeah, I'll take your land. And then he said, yeah, you could still, work. And then I kept on making mistakes because I was very antsy to make it better, quicker, sooner. And I ended up accruing more debt. And I said, I don't have money, I don't have my land. Why don't you take me and my family as slave? That happened. That was the kind of a practice of that time. And God foresaw that. So the reason for Jubilee is my land is given to Steve to pay off the debt, and my family are kind of now slaves to Steve because of my foolish decisions. That's not what God meant for his people. And every time, especially in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, God ends up by saying, you were slaves in Egypt, and I freed you. Always reminds that they were slaves, but they were freed by God. So by the end of 50th year, after a cycle of at least one generation, God is telling them, on the year of Jubilee, Steve, you should return the land. By the time I'll be dead, and probably Steve is dead by the time. So Steve's son, who inherited the land from his father, is supposed to return the land to my son. And is supposed to free my son's family and let them own the land. That was the Jubilee. A lot of times when people hear that, they kind of have the kind of inkling of, is this communism? Mind you that God never commanded everyone should have equal amount of money. No. Let's say Steve kept my land for 40 years, right? During those 40 years, all the produce that came from this land belonged to Steve. He's supposed to let me take whatever I need to feed my family, but everything else is his. 40 years extra crop. He's already a rich person. My family was slave for Steve. I'm pretty sure if he were smart, he would have asked me to build another kind of a storehouse, add extra kitchen, sunroom, extra bedroom for guests. So he already became rich. God is not saying you should give those wealth to Taehoo's children. He's just saying, give this land back and let Taehoo's son have a fresh start. Because what God wanted for his people is that every man should have life of shalom where he could have dignity. Make sense? The problem is in the entire history of Israel, from Exodus all the way to exile to Babylon, Jubilee was never, ever observed. Why? Yeah, greed. Greed. Never. Never, ever. That's why Jesus said his mission is to proclaim the year of the Jubilee. I'll not go through these because I don't want to take too much time. So, what is Jubilee about? Jubilee's divine mandate to maintain the full scope of his redemption of his people from slavery. It's about restoration of shalom. And it's about sustainability. It's about just distribution from divine perspective. According to Jesus' mission statement, proclaiming Jubilee was salvation. Why? Because restoring shalom is what salvation brings to the world. So before we go further, I'm going to just take a few moments to think about the sins of Israel. And that really helps us to understand what this is all about. In Isaiah, again, one of the favorite book of Jesus, in chapter 1, this is the accusation against the kingdom of Judah by Yahweh. And he says, "What to me is the multitude of your sacrifice, says the Lord. I have enough of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath and the calling of convocations. I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hates. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Correct oppressing. Bring justice to the fatherless. Plead the widow's cause." To our surprise, God is not accusing them for neglecting their religious duties. Actually, they were very faithful to do all those duties. So if I paraphrase this, if I contemporize this can go like this. What to me is the multitude of your offering? I have enough of Sunday offering, thanks offering, tithe, special offering. When you come appear before me on Sunday, who has required of you to trample the church? Bring no more vain money offering. Your praise is an abomination to me. Wednesday, small group meeting, Friday, prayer meeting is not what I desire. When you spread your hands while you're praising in prayer, I will not listen. Your hands are full of, if not blood, indifference. Wash yourselves. Make yourselves clean. And he's saying, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression. Israel's hardly neglect their religious duty. The problem is that from what we just went through, God is saying, you are neglecting shalom. You are neglecting shalom. And that's why I accuse you. It keeps going and on. Your silver has become dross, your best wine mixed with water. The merchants were cheating on corners to make a little more money. Same with Amos. About ignoring the poor. About cheating on interests. And in the book of Amos, this is a famous saying, let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So, the reason why Jesus focused on the shalom is because salvation of Jesus doesn't stop saving an individual from sin. That's the beginning. That's the first step. That's the first crucial step of salvation. But God's redemption scope is much bigger than that. What he wanted for Israelites was a just society, a society of community of shalom. And the well-being of community is kind of gauged by the well-being of the weakest, most disenfranchised people's group. And those people are, in the Old Testament, widow, orphan, the sojourner. If a community welcomes and cares for the well-being of widow, orphan, and sojourner, then that community has a shalom. You can tell that, right? An year of Jubilee is about that social shalom. If there's a social shalom, not because of left-wing rhetoric, but because of their fear of God. If because they fear God, if they care for their community because they fear God, they love God, and it is out of their love of God, if they love their neighbor, then Jesus knew there's going to be actually God's salvation being worked out. That's why what he did. So, this may be redundant, but I think it helps us to recap. So, what is salvation? It starts from restoration of spiritual shalom. Our broken relationship with God should be restored. And at least we have initial shalom with God, but this cannot be done. It's a kind of a ongoing process, right? We have shalom with God, but it needs to grow. It needs to go deeper. It's about recognizing my own sin. And when we encounter God, I realize I'm a sinner. That's what happened to everybody in the Bible who had an encounter with God. When Isaiah was in the temple, when he saw God seated on his throne in his glory, what did he say? Wow, great! No, Lord, I'm a sinner. I am doomed. Woe to me. Because I'm a sinner, I'm seeing the glory of God. That's their natural response. So we need to have this. I have sinned. Owning my role in this mess is the first step. Christians are not the ones going around blaming other people for this mess. Christians are the ones going around and saying, it's my fault, Lord. It's because of me that this world is in this state. Because I didn't do my part to restore shalom. Confessing one's sin is admitting my helplessness. And also, it means that I took a role in this unjust system actively and passively. And saying that, Lord, we cannot do it, but you can. I took part in this. It's my sin. I confess. And Lord, forgive me and work through me. Work through us. Because we know that this is not what you want. I know you have planned to prosper me, my family, and my community. That's the first step. Second step, restoring psychological shalom. We should regain our identity. You know, most of you are kind of a second generation or 1.5 generation Korean American. Excuse me for, I'm not excluding you, but let's start with here, right? There are a lot of kind of identity issues, right? And some of you got used to it, but some of you just can't handle that people ask question about where are you from, right? Have you ever seen the YouTube video, what kind of Asian are you? Right? That's the question that they ask. Third, fifth generation Asian American can never ever escape that question. You're not an American. They want to hear, oh, you are a Korean American. You're Asian American, right? Years ago at Berkeley University, the student who graduated with the honor of the top of her class was third generation Japanese American. And she gave her speech. Immaculate, perfect, very intelligent. Imagine, graduating top of the class from Berkeley. And there were two white gentlemen saying to each other, well, she speaks good English. I'm like, probably her brain power is bigger than these two gentlemen put together. But all they could think of was, she speaks English, because they see an Asian. So there's always this issue of identity. As I said, same with you non-Asian people. The world always tells you you're not good enough. Not good enough. So if you allow the world to affirm who you are, it'll always make you feel incomplete or insecure. So we need to regain our identity. I'm a child of God, a masterpiece made in the image of the Creator. Not in a kind of self-delusional way, in a narcissistic way, but in a very healthy way. In fact, the world may be impressed by your position and title and accomplishment. Oh, you graduated from top of your class. Oh, you work in that law firm. Oh, you work at the hospital. Oh, you are the CEO of a company. But do you think God will be impressed by that? Donald Trump is impressing a lot of people with his achievement as a real estate magnate. A lot of people are impressed by that. But would God impressed by Donald Trump? I revived the entire lower Manhattan. Okay. Think about that. Now, your children, especially when they were little, didn't have to prove to gain your love. By the fact that they have your mark, indelible mark. Wow, how can I have a son or daughter who looks exactly like me? That could drive you mad sometimes, but bear with me. But most of the times, it just brings a sense of wonder. That's how God sees us. Just remind yourself that. So we need to overcome inferiority complex, self-love, or unforgiving of myself. Sometimes it may seem to be very godly, not forgiving yourself, but it's not. Jesus forgave our sin. You don't have any right to not forgive the wrongs you've done. You may think, at least this cannot be forgiven. I cannot forgive myself for doing that, saying that to my dad before he died. There may be regret, but you need to be able to overcome those things because God forgave you. Again, they're the same thing, but realizing that fact that no one or nothing can make us feel insignificant. Romans 8, nothing, power, angel, nothing can separate us from the love of God, right? It's the same thing. You are royal priesthood. That's what God is telling you. So don't let the world put you down. Our self-worth comes from our Creator. Third, restoration of social shalom. So we need to begin to see the image of God from the others, right? Nothing, religion, political view, race, nothing is big enough to ignore the image of God. Yeah, it's redundant, right? Just imagine that. Nothing. How can you meet up with the liberal? We can. How can you try to do something with Muslim? We can. Because they are, in fact, God's image bearer. And God is much bigger than any of those isms and religions that we try to separate and categorize. We need to restore shalom in marriage, family, office, politics, economy, culture. Imagine that. In the 70s, early 80s, the song by John Lennon, Imagine, made a big hit. Even today, a lot of people think that's a great song. No religion? I can see that, where it's coming from, but this is a much better version. Imagine restoring shalom. Imagine that. Imagine shalom is restored in our politics, economy, culture. What can be like that, right? 1 year's statistics, U.S. spent $60 billion for 1 year. 1 year, U.S. spent $60 billion in weight loss programs. And at that time, $60 billion was enough money to feed every person in the world who's starving. Think about that. Imagine if we restore the economy of shalom, how things can be. A world where we celebrate diversity but shun discrimination. That's where shalom is. Lastly, when God's salvation is fully worked out, there will be restoration of ecological shalom. So we will regain our role as a caretaker, right? That's our job. Kind of putting a cap on carbon emission is our duty as a caretaker of God's creation. We need to regain solidarity with the ecosystem. Why? Because we are part of God's created world, right? As God created trees and animals, God created us. God obviously put us kind of in charge of these things, but again, the image of king, image of kind of a governor in Bible is not the one who goes and destroys at his will. It's the image of the Messiah, again in book of Isaiah, the chosen one in 53, who does not snub the flickering wick, who does not break the bruised reed, who kind of revives the dying and wounded. That's the image. We need to remind that our stewardship, we need to kind of make sure that our future generation, our children and their children could also enjoy the beauty of Colorado. Clean air, tree lines, kind of potable water, and all of those things. We are steward. That's our job. And again, the big word these days, sustainability. We need to do that. If everybody in the world begins to live according to standard of American family, this earth will be destroyed completely. So really need to begin to think about what it means to be sustainable. So we need to begin to think about alternative values on housing, convenience, and consumption. Same thing, right? So, what is redemption? What is salvation? One way of defining that is, it's God's gift to the universe in restoring life, harmony, and order, celebrating the abundance and diversity of God's creation. And you need to be able to see that this means, again, restoring shalom with God, primarily and foremostly. And from there, we work out restoring shalom with myself, shalom with others, and shalom with created world. Redemption is not just a future event. A lot of people think it's in the future, when you die. No, it's not. It's a reality of here and now that is constantly working out its mystery in our seemingly mundane life. So, when Christians work out shalom, people can see that. Non-Christians recognize that. And they say, wow, that must be God. Because they can't see those shalom in the works in anywhere else. So, that's the salvation that's given to us. And we are steward of this salvation as an individual and as a church. And in this kind of a understanding of God's salvation, we need to engage the very question of this retreat. Who is your neighbor? Okay. From 1 to 2, there's a Q&A session, right? So I'm pretty sure you have a lot of questions. So probably that's a good time to kind of interact with me. But thanks for bearing with me. And okay, let me end with a prayer. Well, 11:10 wasn't too bad, right? Lord, thank you for being our Savior. Confess that we cannot really fully grasp about this scope of your salvation. But we know one thing for sure, that this is the best thing we have. And this is the only thing that matters to us and to humankind and to the universe. It is truly a good news that you are restoring everything the way it should be. Allow us to be able to enjoy, celebrate this salvation in our daily lives. Let our family be blessed by our working of this shalom. And let this church, Logos Central, become a place of shalom where people would come and be nurtured, be restored, and healed, and reborn as your children. Continue to bless us throughout this day. And again, even during this retreat, let there be restoring of shalom in our midst. We pray these things in your Son's precious name. Amen.